I've already set aside the appropriate sized hardware for all of these assemblies. Just be sure that when you're assembling something that you use the right spacer unit. If you're not using the right spacer unit, or if you're not using any spacer at all, it's a sure sign that somebody did a really poor job on the restoration. The right size spacer goes into the right size grommet and is used the correct size hardware to install it. I'm going to tell you right now that the quickest way to recognize an amateur restoration is if they're using the wrong hardware in the wrong areas. Particularly with like Hondas. Honda's got a grade 8 stamp on the edge of almost every single 6mm bolt. And if I don't see that grade 8 stamp, then I know somebody's already been in there and they've replaced the hardware with hardware that I don't want to use. Remember, we've already greased up the thread inserts on the frame, so this is a matter of just finding the appropriate hardware, putting it into a package ready for assembly, and then just assembling it. And then everything gets hand assembled first so we don't force anything, and then we correctly tighten it. Battery box is now installed. These are the rubber grommets that hold in the side covers. These are really important to be new, and they're available through Honda. And the reason we want to use them new is because side covers are kind of fragile anyway, and if you have a really stiff rubber grommet to shove that side cover in, you can actually break the side cover. They've been soaking in Armor All, like I told you previously, and they slip right in to the grommet hole that they were designed for. Boy, that's easy enough, isn't it? And we use new ones, like I said, so that way we don't damage any other parts in the assembly when we put the side cover on. Right? The rectifier has been also cleaned up. It's been mounted with refinished hardware, and it's been torqued down already. Rectifier goes right there, right beside the battery box. And again, I'll go in there with the appropriate size socket and torque them down to the right specs. This is just assembling everything where it goes to make sure that all the hardware is correct and that everything's going to work. The battery or the toolbox pinch sleeves, or whatever you want to call them, the mounting brackets have been installed, but the box itself is loose because I want to position the box in the frame correctly before I tighten those things down. And the toolbox goes right here, and the appropriate hardware has been laid out. I laid out for myself already. And note here too, you can see very clearly the grade 8 on the Honda nuts and bolts. So I'm probably making this all look too easy, right? That this is not such a big deal. The reality of it is kind of a big deal. I did a lot of prep before I installed all this stuff for you to see. And it's going to be probably a little harder for you to do it than it is for me to do it, because I've done several of these and I've done tons of Hondas, so I know where everything goes. There, that little section assembled, and we'll get on to some more stuff in just a second. Hey, here's a complicated little assembly. I got a bunch of parts that go right in here. There's a couple things I wanted to show you. The reason I haven't pre-installed any of them is that this coil base, this frame, has to make extraordinary connection and be grounded to the frame component itself. So if you can see, I've removed the powder coat around these two bolt holes. So when I cinch this coil tight, I'll have an extraordinary ground. And then the other thing I wanted to tell you too, which I probably left out on the last video, which I know I did, is that when the coil gets mounted, when I put a steel screw into an aluminum thread, I use anti-seize compound. I don't use grease. So if it's a steel in aluminum, use anti-seize compound. If it's steel into steel or zinc into zinc, like this connection right here, then you can go ahead and just use wheel bearing grease. Okay? So the coil goes in like this. I'll see if I can do this smoothly because there's a lot of parts that go in, like into this one little area. And so there's a lot of stuff that's kind of like going on, you know what I mean? So that goes in there. Then the rubber grommets in the ignition switch also have the steel sleeves in them, and they're the correct steel sleeves. You see that? Then there's a big fender washer on the outside. Then this whole mess goes in here. Let's see if I get that. going to go ahead and put a nut and a lock washer on the coil so it doesn't move around. Then the horn, with its grommets and its steel sleeves, go on the other side of the ignition switch, like this. And then it has a nut plate. The nut plate also incorporates a hanger for the tachometer wire when the motor's in there. You see that? So we're going to put all that in as well. But for this nut plate, since it's all rubber cushioned through here, I'm going to use a dab of Loctite so I don't have to crank down those nuts to keep them in place. The Loctite will keep them in place. So I'll put just a little dab of Loctite on each one of these threads, and then this nut plate goes on the other side. There we go. Loctite on. And just like that, that's that whole mess that goes in there, and then it gets cranked down tight. So I've tightened that whole mechanism down now, and that's where it's going to live until the bike is actually shipped. But what I spoke of, which was having this coil grounded, because it needs to function with the ground, rather than check it later, you check that stuff as you build. I have here a simple multimeter, which you should have. If you don't have one, you should go get one. They're not very expensive. And I'm going to check for continuity between the coil cage and the frame stuff where it's threaded, and I have a bolt there already. I just want to make sure that I've got an extraordinary ground, and you do that before you move on. So it's a simple matter of connecting one lead to the box and one lead to a nut that's already been bolted in, and showing 100% continuity in that connection. And so I know that this stuff is ready to go. I don't have to go back and check this if I have some problem down the road. Okay? Front fork lock looks just like this. And we insert the key and make the pin line up with the setting bar in here. I don't know what you'd actually even call that, the centering bar. Then it installs really easy. I'm going to goop this thing up with some grease. They rarely ever get taken out unless there's an operation like this going on. And then install the whole mess in there. What keeps this thing from coming out anytime you pull the key out when it's in the removed position is this simple little retainer mechanism, and it goes in right there. And that shows you where the key goes. There's a little door on it to kind of protect it. What's unusual about this bike and hard to find these days is the key to the fork lock is the same as the ignition key. Usually they've been misplaced somehow, and they're not match set anymore, and this is a match set, so it makes it just that much more valuable. And that stuff works. Ready to move on. Hey, just wanted to take a second here and show you the inner mudguard for this SL350. It's really easy to get in if the tire is off. All it does is simply get flexed together and then inserted into these clips on either side of the frame. Once the tire is on, it's a pain in the butt. So make sure that you get that inner mudguard in before you put the wheels on, which we're just about to do. I'm ready to put on the rear wheel. I just wanted to show you what I did here. This is a precaution that I've taken. I've strapped the motorcycle frame to my bench, because at this point, when you start putting parts that can teeter and then you're offsetting the weight of the motorcycle drastically as you're assembling and stuff, this thing can go to the ground so easy, and we've done so much good work to it. I want to make sure that it's absolutely secure. I've lost motorcycles off the bench like most people have, and I just refuse to do it anymore. So I make sure that the thing is bolted down really tight. I'm ready to put on the rear wheel, and I have the axle assembly right here. And you'll see that this bushing spacer rides on the wheel seal side of the sprocket. So there is a chain adjuster, a spacer, the axle, the spacer on the right side on the outside of the brake hub, another chain adjuster, and then the nut, and then this has already been greased. I put the torque arm on the swing arm, and I want you to make sure that you do this too before you put the rear wheel on, because getting this torque arm in and getting the cotter key on that you can see right there is really a pain in the butt with the wheel on. So do this stuff in advance. Okay? I'm going to put the rear wheel on and I'll show you how that goes.